Hey Stat Rollers, Bill with Roll Stats, and this week we're going to take another trip down memory lane. We're going to reminisce and review this. That's right, Dungeon Module X1, The Isle of Dread, published by TSR in 1981 and written by David Zeb Cook and Tom Moldvay. My hero, my favorite, Tom Moldvay. Really, it's more of a Zeb Cook module, but Moldvay's name is still attached. This is a phenomenal module, and I can't wait to dive into it, so let's do that right now. So really quick, before we dive in, if you're new here, if this is your first time here and you like to look back at these old school TSR modules, if you like to take a trip down the Dungeons & Dragons memory lane, so to speak, please do consider becoming a stat roller. Join the community, subscribe. This is a great community. I love this community. The comments are always fantastic. I like to reminisce and go back and visit these old TSR modules every now and again, but most of my commentary and tips and tricks and things of that nature are system agnostic, meaning that you don't have to use them specifically in this particular module, and you don't need to use them specifically for Dungeons & Dragons. You can apply these same tips and tricks that I'm going to give you for running through this wilderness adventure, this hex crawl. You can apply that to your 5e game. You can apply that to your basic fantasy game. You can apply that to your low fantasy game. So if you like Dungeons & Dragons in general, or if you just like role-playing games, please do consider subscribing and clicking the bell so that you'll be updated of all new upcoming videos. Also, please do watch through to the end of the video. At the end of the video, I'm going to tell you how you can become a Roll Stats Insider. Roll Stats Insiders, you're going to get additional material related to this video, specifically to wilderness crawls, hex crawls, and how to play a more narrative game in this week's issue of the Roll Stats Insider. If that sounds interesting to you, again, please do stay through to the end of the video, find out how you can become a Roll Stats Insider if you're not already one, and I'll reveal the supplemental material that's going to be issued in relation to this video. So please do stay through to the end. But enough shameless self-promotion, let's get into this module. Let's actually dig into this module, X1 Isle of Dread, which is really one of the best wilderness modules that's ever been published by TSR. So this is Dungeon Module X1, The Isle of Dread, written by David Cook and Tom Moldvay. It is a wilderness adventure for character levels 3 to 7. It was published in 1981 originally by TSR Products, and it was included in the Expert Set, so the David Zeb Cook Expert Set. This was the module that was included within that box set, and as such, it's probably second in line to B2, Keep on the Borderlands, in terms of its popularity and its notoriety, right? Everyone has heard of this module. If you grew up playing D&D in the 80s, you probably played through this module, and even if you didn't play through it, you've definitely heard of it. This is, again, one of the most iconic modules ever written. I'll leave a link down below to my review of B2 Keep on the Borderlands. If you haven't seen that one yet, I would watch that one first. That one uses the Moldvay basic rules. This is really levels 3 to 7, so this would be the subsequent module that generally most people took their characters through. You started in B2 and then you ended up in X1. X1 uses these rules, right? The expert rules. It was, after all, included in this particular set. The expert set, the David Zeb Cook version of BX rules, the expert part of BX, and it really draws heavily from this rule set. Coincidentally, there will be a link down below to this rule set on DM's Guild if you're interested in looking at this rule set, which I would. If I were you, I would go get a PDF version of this rule set. It really is a phenomenal rule set. There will also be links down below to the PDF version of X1 Isle of Dread. And for those of you 5e players out there will be a link down below to the Goodman Games reissue of the Isle of Dread. This actually contains the original Isle of Dread as well as a 5e conversion so that you can play this game through with your 5e players, as well as some thoughts and opinions from some luminaries within the D&D world on exactly what the Isle of Dread meant to them and what it means to Dungeons & Dragons in general. It truly is an iconic module, and it's one that everyone should run through at least once. With that being said, before we go any further, and again, much like with my review of B2 Keep on the Borderlands, I can't imagine that I'm going to spoil this for anyone. I can't imagine there's anybody that hasn't at least read through this, if not played through this, or run it multiple times. But if you haven't, there will be spoilers in this particular video. So if you haven't played through Isle of Dread yet and you want to play through the Isle of Dread, I would suggest that you stop now and point your DM this way so that your DM can run you through this adventure, because there will be spoilers. Okay, so with the spoiler out of the way, let's jump into it, right? So the Isle of Dread is a pulpy style island adventure, wilderness adventure, true hex crawl. Actually, the first hex crawl that was produced by TSR, and in my opinion, one of the best hex crawls ever. It really is King Kong with a T-Rex, right? So when you're running through this module, you want to run this like it's King Kong. Legitimately, this is an homage to King Kong. That's truly how it should be run. Think pirates, think dinosaurs, think cannibals. This is truly a great hex crawl with a ton of stuff. This is really a great sandbox. Whereas Keep on the Borderlands was really the first introduction to a sandbox, meaning it was a mini sandbox. This is a full-on open world sandbox. And much like B2 Keep on the Borderlands, it does include some instruction for dungeon masters who aren't necessarily used to running a sandbox, because here's the thing about Isle of Dread. This can actually be the best module you've ever played through in your life, or it can be the worst module you've ever played through in your life, right? And it depends on really how you run it. If you're not used to running a sandbox, if you're not used to running an open world game, this can be boring, and it can be frustrating, and it can be hard to get through. It can be a chore to get through, actually. Or it can be the most exciting, most freeform, greatest experience that you and your players have ever had at the table. It just takes a little foresight into how to approach and how to run a sandbox game, how to run a wilderness adventure, how to run an open world style campaign. So as we run through and review this and reminisce about this wonderful module, I'm going to give you a few of my tips on how to run this particular module, how to run a sandbox campaign, how to run an open world game. And it's really going to depend on narrative, right? What I mean is, it's hard to run a sandbox game. It's hard to run an open world game. It's certainly hard to run this module without having a narrative style. This is not a numbers style module. This is not a number style adventure. If you try to run this as a number style adventure, you're going to have a bad time. Your players aren't really going to know what their purpose is or what they're supposed to do. We want to give our players hooks. We want to give our players rumors. We want to be as descriptive and narrative as we can possibly be to let them know when they're on the right track, when they've discovered something, to make the game exciting, because the bottom line is random encounters are the bulk of this game. There really is no predefined script for this game. There is no predefined destination for this game. There is no predefined hook for this game. It is a series of random encounters. It is exploration, right? If you're not necessarily used to playing in that third pillar, if your players are not necessarily used to playing in that third pillar or know what they're supposed to do, this can be a bit long and tedious. However, if you really play up that exploration factor, if you give them enough hooks and rumors with which to follow, and don't just leave them floundering when the action begins to slow down, you're going to have a great time with this module. It is phenomenal. So let's get into it. As with most modules at this time, the cover is removable, meaning that it's not stapled together. The booklet is stapled together, and then the cover is separate because on the back side are maps. One of the greatest things about this module is the maps. There are maps of everything, including the known world, including Mystara. It builds out Mystara a little bit further because it's assuming that your players are originating in Specularum and they're finding their way to the Isle of Dread. This module gives you tons of maps, which don't have to be used just particularly in this module. These maps can be used in your own world. If you watched my last video, you know that good artists create and great artists steal, so you can take any of these maps, any of these ideas, and drop them into your own world. So even if you're not going to run this, you can take these maps, which are phenomenal. But anyway, as I was saying, so the maps of Taboo Island, which is really sort of the culmination of this module, your players will more or less end up at Taboo Island to find the Black Pearl, right? They're going to fight the secret big bad evil guys, which we'll get into later, and they're going to discover this Black Pearl, which is really the hook that drew them in to begin with, right? So opening it up on page 1, you'll see the Phanatons. This is a new monster that was added, a new creature that was added. The cool thing about this particular module is it actually does have a bunch of new monsters that it added to the game and that you could have pulled into your game. That's actually in part 5. These Phanatons were amazing. Think of them as like a cross between raccoons and flying squirrels. Really cool. But there are 5 parts to this particular module, starting with part 1, the introduction. And part 1 really just contains introductory information for the DM. It introduces you to the module itself and what exactly is a wilderness adventure, how does that relate to this particular module itself. The map of the continent, like I said, it built out Mystara much more. So this was your introduction to the principles of Glantry and the Ethangar Khanate and the Heldan Freeholds and the Kingdom of Vestland and the Kingdom of Osland. This really started to build out Mystara. Again, this is pre-Gazetteer, so this is 1981. The Gazetteers haven't been introduced yet, but this really began to build out those Gazetteers. This is the basis, the foundation from which those Gazetteers were built. As I said previously, since your characters are going to begin in Specularum and then travel to the Isle of Dread, this is giving you some background information on the different areas of the continental map, so of the known world of Mystara era itself. It's a paragraph or so describing each one of the major areas. So really, part 1, Dungeon Master information, key to the continental map, and weather and climate, right? Weather and climate around the Isle of Dread. Just to give you a little bit of background to let you know what a wilderness adventure is, how it pertains to this particular module, how best to run it, and where your party is coming from so that you can tie them in ultimately to the adventure. And then that takes us to part 2, beginning with background. And that's really, how are your players going to interact with this particular module? How are you going to hook them in? How are you going to tie them in? It outlines a plot hook where your party comes upon a cache of scrolls. They got wet somehow, and as you dried them out, you realize that none of them were actually magical, but one of these contained a note, a captain's log, if you will, from Rory Barbarossa, who was an adventurer and pirate and captain who died 30 years ago, but that really alludes to the Isle of Dread and this mysterious black pearl. And that's what's going to hook your party in. That's what's going to get them to go there. And then you would role play through, and specifically this ties into that whole sandbox style. They have to acquire a boat. How are they going to get out there? What are they going to do when they get there? You role play through this entire scenario and really play up that fact of exploration, that sense of exploring the unknown, and let the party figure out how they're going to make it to the Isle of Dread. And they include 4 different suggestions on how the party can acquire a boat if your party can't figure it out. Again, in any adventure, don't let your party flounder. If they legitimately can't figure out what to do next, they don't know where to go, offer them some hooks, whether that be from NPCs or from friends of the party, what have you. Really offer them some hooks, offer them some lifelines. And the module itself offers 4 different scenarios with which the party might acquire a boat. Again, if your party can't figure anything out, I would suggest going through and using some of those. And it then goes on to the adventure section, which really explains boat travel, ship travel, because it's going to take your party a while to reach the Isle of Dread. How do you manage the climate? How do you manage the weather? How do you manage wandering monsters as they venture forward on their shipborne trek to reach the Isle of Dread? The module itself explains how you should do that, the dice that you should roll, and how often you should. And then it moves on to using the wilderness wandering monster tables. You know, this is probably the most important part of this adventure. The rest of the module itself outlines specific encounters that your players could come across. They are going to come across a bunch of wandering monsters, right? The exploration model, this hex crawl style adventure, is really all about wandering monsters. And so you should really familiarize yourself with the wandering monsters tables, not just the wandering monsters tables themselves, but how they work, the types of monsters that can be encountered. The module itself points out that you as a DM should use logic when rolling for wandering monsters. In other words, if you roll something that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, modify it. Honestly, you don't even have to roll. You can actually pick. So you can roll to see if the party encounters a wandering monster, but it's probably better off to actually pick the wandering monster that they're going to encounter as opposed to rolling randomly, because you can end up with some really crazy results. That would be my tip. My tip is, yes, certainly roll for wandering monster encounters. Don't force wandering monster encounters upon your party, but pick what those wandering monsters are going to be based on the terrain that they're in at the point, based on where they're at within the adventure, based on what you think best fits the narrative and the story. Honestly, that's the best way to do it, and that would be my advice. We then move on to part 3, which is the key to the main island encounter areas. The island itself is separated into 2 different areas. Taboo Island, which is sort of that main encounter where the Black Pearl is stored, and the rest of the island, the main island. This maps out the main island encounter areas. And not wandering monster encounters, but actually predefined spots on the map where the players could or could not, depending on which way they go. Because again, remember, it's completely and totally open sandbox. These are just encounters that they could run across. These are encounters that they might have. And that actually starts with the village of Tanaroa. So this one, you know, they are going to come across the village of Tanaroa no matter what. This is going to be their main base of operations as they're on the Isle of Dread. And I would say that you really build this up. Again, keep in mind that you're playing King Kong. These are the natives in King Kong. These are not necessarily adversarial, depending on how your party treats them, right? But they are not the cannibals. These are natives that are interested in trade from the mainland. These are natives that are interested in opening up trade routes. Play that up. That's a great aspect. The other really cool thing, okay, so the really cool thing about Tanaroa, and actually the really cool thing about the Isle of Dread itself, is how they treat zombies, right? Zombies are used by the villagers within Tanaroa to do sort of the grunt labor, right? They're the ditch diggers of the world. They're the folks who are harvesting crops. They're doing things that the villagers within Tanaroa don't necessarily want to do themselves, so they control this undead force and use it to perform these daily functions. It's an odd concept for zombies and not something that I've ever come across before, and I would say play that up. Introduce a couple encounters with your players in the beginning where they first see these zombies and immediately the reaction is going to be zombies. We must kill them. And it's cool to role play through, no, these are not necessarily creatures to be feared or killed. These are creatures that we use as our workforce, right? Give it a shot. Make sure you play that aspect up, really populate the village of Tangaroa with NPCs, give everyone a motivation. Be sure to drop tons of hints, tons of hooks. The Tangaroans know about Taboo Island. They know about the Kapru. Certainly they don't know that they are Kapru, but it's this strange, mysterious race of evil creatures. They know about the Black Pearl. Reinforce the rumor of the Black Pearl. Make sure that they know that the Black Pearl is rumored to be on Taboo Island. Give them a final destination. Certainly warn them. The Tangaroans know the reason that they built the giant wall is that there are these massive prehistoric dinosaur-like beasts that roam around. And that's the other thing. When you drop these hooks, when you drop these rumors, don't say, well, it's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or it's a Plesiosaur, or it's an Ankylosaurus, or it's a Pteranodon. Describe the beast. What would the Tangaroans call it? And that's how you give the hook. That's how you give the rumor. It builds the sense of intrigue. It builds the sense of excitement, but moreover, it hooks your players in, because then your players will be like, haha, I know what that is based on the description. That is the coolest part of this adventure. It is dropping those hooks. It's building the sense of excitement. It's building that sense of exploration and having your players actually want to go out and explore the rest of the island, to find that Black Pearl, to understand what these evil aquatic beings are that live on Taboo Island. That's the best part of this adventure. That's the best part of this module. And if you don't do that, you're missing a lot. Again, your players are going to come up with ideas that you never even thought of. Just let their imagination fly and you'll be amazed at what they can come up with in this village of Tangaroa. But eventually your players are going to want to go find that Black Pearl, right? They're in search of the Black Pearl and they're going to leave the village of Tangaroa. They're going to go beyond that great wall. They're going to open up the gates and they're going to go through. Keep in mind the Tangaroans are not going to accompany them. The Tangaroans are quite frankly terrified to go beyond that wall. They will not accompany the party whatsoever. However, they can equip the party with whatever that they need, and they can certainly give some rumors and some hooks. Again, right? You're going to hook your party in, you're going to hook your players in with these rumors to give them an idea of where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do. And when they do finally move out, there's a bunch of cool encounters in here. You know, there's a pirate's lair, which is amazing. I would absolutely suggest that your players run across the pirates. There's the Phantom lair, which again, I told you in the beginning, those Phantoms are sort of like a cross between flying squirrels and raccoons, and they're really, really cool. And there is the Rakasta camp. They have to absolutely make sure that your players steer them in the direction. Make sure that they come across the Rakastas. The Rakastas are really cool. They're sort of like the Tabaxi of old school BX, right? So, you know, 5e has the Tabaxi race, the cat people race. BX had this Rakasta, which is essentially the same thing. Really, really cool. And it was brand new. It was, again, a new monster, one that's referenced in Part 5, which we'll get to later. Part 5 actually introduced a bunch of cool monsters, the Rakasta being one, the Phantom being one. There's also an Aranea lair, which is, again, another new monster, which was really cool. Think spiders who are magic users, spiders who are wizards. The amount of new stuff that the Isle of Dread introduced was phenomenal, and it's actually one of the reasons why I think that this module is so well loved to this day, and certainly why I love it. And of course, there's a multitude of dinosaurs. There's a T-Rex, there's an Ankylosaurus, there's a Pteranodon. There are dinosaurs everywhere in this module, and you know, that's just good time, right? But there's also a green dragon. So this is definitely a challenging module, right? This is definitely not going to be a hack and slash. If your party is used to conquering every foe that they come across and they just, you know, jump right into combat, they're gonna have a bad time, right? There are quite a few encounters in this particular module, and there are quite a few creatures and monsters that they're gonna come across that they should run from. Not only should they run from, but if they don't run from them, they're going to die, right? So as you're going through this module, stress to your players the danger that surrounds them. Stress to your players just how dangerous this world is and how out of their league these particular creatures are, right? And maybe even give them a little fair warning at first, right? Instead of simply stumbling into a T-Rex, they hear crashing through the woods. They hear the roar of this T-Rex at first. They feel the ground shaking. They know something big is coming. Give them a heads up that this is not something that they want to face, or it's something that they're not ready to face just yet, right? Like, be fair, and give them fair warning. And that brings us to Part 4, which is Taboo Island. This is sort of the culmination of the module itself. This is where the Kapru are. This is where the Black Pearl is. This is really the ultimate destination of your players, at least in the first run through. And you'll see actually later on in this section, the module itself gives some hooks and some ideas for further exploration within the Isle of Dread, which I think is really, really cool and was a great addition. But for now, for this initial adventure, right, they're here to find this Black Pearl that they've heard so much about from Rory Barbarossa, right? Like, they're here to find this Black Pearl. They're here to figure out what these evil fish-like creatures are that live on Taboo Island. And Taboo Island really reverts back into more of a dungeon dungeon crawl than any other part of the module. There are some generic caves that are included for encounter areas, but really this is overland adventure. Most of this module, the 90% of this module, the bulk of it is overland wilderness adventure hex crawls. But Taboo Island itself does have a minor dungeon crawl, which is actually pretty cool. And that is the map back at the beginning when I showed you the inlay of the cover that you can pull off. That's really the dungeon crawl that they're going to be going through. And it's a very cool one. Play that just as you would any other dungeon crawl, right? Don't lose your narrative style. Obviously, still make it new, still make it exciting, still make it awe-inspiring, things that they've never seen before, but it's a dungeon crawl. We covered dungeon crawls in B2 Keep on the Borderlands, which is really the granddaddy of all dungeon crawls. So again, if you haven't seen that video, there's a link to it down below in the description. Go check that out, and that'll give you my thoughts on a dungeon crawl. So let's assume they made it through the dungeon crawl, they've defeated the evil Kaparu, and they've recovered the Black Pearl. Like I was saying earlier, there are some cool additions for further adventures on the Isle of Dread, so if your party is really digging, if your players are really digging this hex crawl style adventure, there are some further adventures that you can play through on the Isle of Dread, including destroying the zombie master, just mapping out the entire island. So that's the other cool thing about this adventure. There are a ton of handouts. In addition to the note from Rory Barbarossa, there's a handout map. So there's a map, there's a player's map that Rory Barbarossa himself had initially begun to fill out that's empty for the most part, that the players can go through and map out themselves. It's just really cool, and it's interactive. It draws the player's attention, and it really keeps them hooked and keyed into the module itself and the adventure as it goes on. There's a dinosaur hunt. I mean, come on, like really? What group of players does not want to go on a dinosaur hunt? Think about how valuable these things are. Nobody has ever seen these before. And again, like I said, this is King Kong. Take the dinosaur alive. Think of some lord or some lady or king or queen or some noble somewhere who would want this in their own personal zoo, right? So there are multiple different avenues that you can explore with that. Or exterminating the pirates. This has become a big pirate base. Or perhaps your players want to become pirates. Like, who am I to judge, right? And then the modules really just offers some information for you to build out your own encounters if you wanted to add specific encounters, certain encounters that play into your story, however you're adapting it. Building out NPCs, specifically native leaders, is going to be really important, so they've included some sample ones as well as ways to build out those types of encounters yourself. And then part 5 is really just a monster manual, right? Like, it goes through all of the new monsters that have been added, including a ton of dinosaurs, the Phanatan, which is really cool, the Rakasta, which is just awesome. I wanted the Rakasta to be a playable race because it really is. It's like the Tabaxi, and I actually think that the Rakasta was a playable race later in Bekmi, but it was not a playable race, unfortunately, in BX. But I do think that in later versions, in the Bekmi versions, that the Rakasta actually did become a playable race, but they are just really, really cool. Again, think Tabaxi, but more badass. I feel like Tabaxi are more suited to the roguish type, where I feel that the Rakasta are more like cat-like barbarians, and it's just really, really awesome. And that's it, right? I mean, the entire module is 30 pages from front to back. Well, not counting actually the actual last page in the module itself is a handout. It's a cutout handout with the letter from Rory Barbarossa as well as the player's fillable map. But 30 pages of information. Now here's the thing. You're thinking 30 pages. Again, you 5e folks, you're used to these 250 page campaign booklets. I'm going to tell you that 30 pages is packed with so much information that you can play this module for months. And I mean months. If you're truly exploring, if you're truly playing the module the way that it was meant to be played, this will take months for you to complete, for you to completely map out the island and encounter everything that was meant to be encountered and really, really enjoy the module for what it is, a true wilderness adventure. That's really how I want to close this, right? Let's talk about running a wilderness adventure. Not even necessarily this adventure, any wilderness adventure. The key is narrative style. And I know you guys are sick of hearing me say this already, but I promise you it's worth it. So I'm going to give you an example. This module could be the most boring slog through a hex crawl that you've ever had in your life, or it could be the most amazing and exciting hex crawl you've ever had in your life. And it does come down to narrative. So, for example, your party is just rested, they're packing up their equipment, they're getting ready to push forward for that day to wherever they're going, and they decide that they're going to go in the northeast direction through this set of hills that they've just encountered. This is the way that they're going to push for the rest of the day. You could roll for wandering monsters and then just say, okay, it's a swamp square. right? You could just say, oh, it's a swamp hex. And then your party just like checks in the little hex and they make it to there. And then that's it. That's not fun or exciting for you. That's not fun or exciting for your party, right? Just saying, oh, okay, that hex is a jungle hex, or that hex is a swamp hex, or that hex is a mountainous hex. That doesn't say anything, and that's just kind of boring, right? Like, and I mean, and far be it for me to judge how anyone plays their game, but to me, that's just boring. That's boring as a DM, that's boring as a player. What you need to do is it needs to be a narrative style. And I don't mean just encounters. We'll get to encounters for a second, but I mean just mapping out the particular hexes within the island, mapping out the area. It shouldn't just be, well, I want to move northeast, and you're like, okay, it's a swamp. It should be, okay, we're packing up and we're heading northeast, and you should narrate what that's like. And I don't mean that you have to go through everything, every single minute or moment of that particular day, but it should pull in climate. You should pull in what they smell. You should pull in what they see. You should pull in what they're experiencing. So instead of just saying, okay, that hex is a swamp hex, you need to really explain and draw them in, hook them in with a narrative style into what's happening, and they're going to buy into it much more, right? That's the whole key, and it doesn't have to even be encounters. You should, if I were you, I would suggest really coming up with a paragraph or two of how the players stumble across each encounter. So when they come across this T-Rex, when they come across the plesiosaur, when they come across the green dragon, how are you explaining that to them? Because if you are just explaining, well, there's a green dragon, roll for initiative, that's not fun, right? I don't know, maybe it is. I shouldn't say it's not fun. Maybe that's the way that you prefer to play, but I think that you're missing the point of a wilderness adventure. I think you're missing the point of a hex crawl. A hex crawl is you are painting in your players' minds a picture. This is a theater of the mind adventure. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that wilderness adventures, hex crawls, rely heavily on theater of the mind. This isn't about minis on a battle map. It's absolutely not. It's about what your players are seeing, what they're experiencing, what they're smelling, what they're feeling. That's what a hex crawl is about. That's what a wilderness adventure is about. It's about painting a picture for your players so vivid that they can feel themselves there. And, if you don't play it that way, I think that your players are missing something. I think that they're not as invested as they could be, and I think that you're probably not as invested as you could be, and you're not having as much fun as you possibly could. And I'm not saying that there is a right or wrong way to play. I'm arguing against that. I'm saying try it in a narrative style. Try to paint a picture. Try to play theater of the mind when you're doing, specifically when you're doing hex crawls, specifically when you're doing wilderness adventures, and then tell me, is it better? Is it worse? Seriously, I need you to leave me down below in the comments, right? I need you to leave me down below in the comments. Have you run hex crawls before? Are you bored with hex crawls? Do you think that wilderness adventures, true sandbox, open world adventures are boring? And if so, why? And I'm willing to bet that the reason that you don't particularly care for hex crawls, the reason that you don't particularly care for wilderness adventures is because of that lack of narrative theater of the mind style of play. It's called for in wilderness adventures. I'm not saying that when you do have encounters that you can't revert back to your minis on a battle mat. What I'm saying is, as your party is trekking through this uncharted wilderness, as your party is struggling against the elements, if you're not playing those elements, if you're not using those elements as a part of the game, if you're not using their struggles and they're overcoming those particular challenges as part of the game, then you're missing a large part of what it is to play a wilderness adventure. And I think you should try it and let me know what you think. If it's stupid and you think you hate it, then come back and tell me you hate it. This is stupid. I can't, how this is the worst thing in the world. I don't think that that's going to be the case. I actually think that once you try it, you're really going to enjoy it, and then you're going to start to incorporate more theater of the mind, even into your dungeon crawls, even into your specific encounters. Encounters, even with minis on a battle mat, can be enhanced and improved by using theater of the mind. What I mean is, yes, you're certainly using minis on a battle mat, but if you narrate the action, if you become much more narrative in your style as a DM, you can utilize minis on a battle mat to reinforce the picture that you're painting within their mind. The minis on a battle mat should not take place of the picture that you're creating in your player's mind. It should enhance the picture that you're painting in your player's mind. At least that's my opinion, and that's what's worked for me. So really, you let me know. Let me know down in the comments. And that actually brings me to the Rollstat Insider additional content for this week. So this week in the Rollstat Insider newsletter will be included links links to PDFs that contain narrative description for overland adventures, for wilderness adventures. What I mean by that is these will be PDFs that you can describe different terrain to your players. So use it as sort of a cheat sheet, right? What it will include will be lists of different descriptors that you can use for different types of terrain. So think desert terrain or jungle terrain or mountainous terrain. And these are really descriptors that I use in my game, particularly for hex crawls. Not just descriptors of what the characters see, but descriptors of what the characters are feeling, descriptors of what the characters are smelling, descriptors of the terrain in general to really give you a more narrative style. I think that you're going to really find it useful, and I hope you do enjoy it. For those of you who are not Roll Stats Insiders yet, there's going to be a link down below in the description where you can become a Roll Stats Insider. It's really just a newsletter, right? So you're going to give me your email address and your first name, and I promise you I'm not going to spam you. It's just a way that I disseminate supporting material that really reinforce the ideas in the videos that I'm talking about. It's a way for me to give a little something extra to you Roll Stats Insiders, to you stat rollers. So if you'd like to get in on that, please do hit the link down below in the description and become a Roll Stats Insider. We'd love to have you. So that is my review and my thoughts on Dungeon Module X1, the Isle of Dread. And not just this particular module, but sort of my thoughts, opinions, and tips on running a wilderness adventure in general. Again, this is system agnostic. The advice that I'm giving to you doesn't apply specifically to BX. It doesn't apply specifically to 5e. It doesn't apply specifically to basic fantasy. You can apply these to any wilderness adventure that you're running, any sort of hex crawl type campaign or adventure that you're running. You can certainly apply these tips. I hope you did find them valuable. I love this module. I think that if you have not played this module yet, you definitely should. It is worth having this module. It's worth running through this module simply for the experience, right? It's the shared experience that we've all run through the Isle of Dread ourselves. It's almost like a rite of passage for Dungeons & Dragons players, so if you haven't run through it yet, you definitely should. With that in mind, there will be links down below in the description to the PDF of X1 itself, to the PDF of the expert rules, to the Goodman Games 5e conversion, as well as the link to join up to become a Roll Stats Insider. If you want to get any of that, the links will be down below in the description. Also in the description down below, there will be a link to DBJ on RPG's YouTube channel. He reached out to me recently and he actually wants to do an interview with me. He wants to interview me on his show, DBJ on RPG. You can find the link to his YouTube channel down below. I'm not sure how that will be released, if that's going to be a live interview or if that'll be released after the fact. Tentatively, it is scheduled for Sunday, March 8th. I'll be doing the interview with him. This was just really cool because I follow DBJ. He's amazing, right? Ironically enough, he is a third pillar guy. That's his focus, his primary focus is the third pillar, the exploration pillar, which ironically works in really well for this channel. But if you are not familiar with DBJ on RPG, go check him out. I guess what I'm saying is I'm truly honored that he asked to interview me because I should be interviewing him. He's like one of my idols. But in addition to his YouTube channel, he's actually also a member of Critical Hit Publishing. He's a content creator for Critical Hit Publishing. They have a ton of stuff out on DriveThruRPG, and there will be a link down to that below in the description as well. He has written a massive amount of stuff, so I'll actually link to all of that stuff on DriveThruRPG. It'll be down below. So make sure you follow DBJ on YouTube, hit all of the other links, become a Roll Stat Insider, share this video, like it, share this with your gaming group, share this with your friends, share, like, subscribe, hit the bell, become a Roll Stat subscriber, become a part of the community. We'd love to have you, and as always, may the dice roll ever in your favor.